We know as a business owner that we need to have a business plan. And there's so many different messages around business planning. Is it a 10-year plan? Is it a 1-year plan? We hear messaging around a 1-page business plan. Is it a 90-day plan? Today, Darrick Boyes shares with us the different elements to plans, and it's way more than just a business plan. Darrick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Darrick, tell me, why did you become a business coach?
Well, for quite a few different reasons. I mean, I grew up around entrepreneurs. I've always really felt passionate about the industry, like being an entrepreneur, before I even knew what it was. And, talking back to, I have conversation with my mom where I used to fight over the till, the cash register in kindergarten. I used to try to run my own store, in those kind of situations. So she always knew that I was going to be an entrepreneur. She used to say that. And my dad was an entrepreneur. But what was, when I finally really knew I was going to be a business coach was, and to be honest, I felt like I've always been one, but I felt really compelled when I came across ActionCOACH. And, somebody had insinuated that what I was doing previously was business consulting for, a large company, Ford in Canada. And, basically they said, I asked for a description, what was business coaching? And they said, well, basically it's like what you do, only you stay with the business to help, along with the way. And I thought, well, that's got to be the best thing that ever happened, because that was what I felt was missing in my career. Was I felt like we'd come in and help, but then we'd leave and it would go back to revert back to what they always did. And I just felt that we should stick around. And I always, in hindsight, I used to bring it up to the big corporation, was we need to stay with them for a long period of time till they buy into it. And it was funny because somebody said, that sounds like business coaching. And I didn't know what it was. And then I really researched it and came across ActionCOACH. And that's pretty much when I knew I was going to go down that road.
And so you've been coaching for let's say a few years now. Darrick, what do you love the most about helping your clients?
Oh, I love breakthroughs. I love seeing business owners succeed. And I know that sounds cliche, but I get more out of helping others than I ever would out of any sort of reward I get, because that is my reward, technically. What I get out of it is I get to surround myself with people who are resilient, who are constant and never-ending improvement. So, in hindsight, I get a lot of value because I have to keep growing myself as well. And so I would say the biggest value I get is the value that they have by growing themselves, because I have to stay ahead of them.
You can't help but have to grow as a result of that. And so, you get to speak with hundreds of business owners. Darrick, what do you find is the biggest challenge that business owners that you get to speak to have?
Well, there's a lot of challenges, so I can't really say that I can attest to the biggest challenge, because everybody has a different challenge in business. But I would say a lot of them just have never really had an opportunity to really plan what they're doing. They're very powerful people. They have a ton of, like I said, resilience. And they believe in they believe they can achieve anything. But I think the challenge is they start with no direction. And, that tends to be a problem. And why I know that is because that was the story of my life. I would walk through walls to succeed, but there was much easier ways if I just would have stopped and planned it out. So, I think the fact that they don't always start with the end in mind is a big challenge, because they get to a stage where finally they start to realize, I should have planned different, I should have thought different. And maybe that's part of the learning experience, but I do see it as a challenge when they don't really plan what they want out of their business. I think that's a big challenge. And obviously time, team, money, those are always challenges, but really a lot of that can be mitigated by just having an end in mind.
Yeah, great. So planning. So how far ahead should a business plan?
Well, very far. I mean, I do a lot of different planning in my life since being introduced to the action coach world. Obviously, I've always planned long term. I've always thought big and vision. Um, I never really broke it down. So I would say, like, when we're talking how far ahead we should plan, forever. I think one of my one of the books that I read before was called The Seven Habits, and in the book they really go deep into the idea that if you're looking forward into the future, and say you're at your funeral, they gave an example, and they said basically your eulogy is about to be said. What would you want to be said at that point? What would you want them to say, and would you be happy with what it is today? So plan that far ahead to say, when it comes time, what would they say about me in the future? And I think that's 100 years from now. If you can do that, that's kind of when you should start planning, and then work your way back from there.
Yeah, so it's really planning your life, isn't it? Not just your business, planning your life out.
Yeah, and I mean, a big point that I've learned is that we need to have an end in mind, and the more time you give yourself to plan that, the better off you are, because you go through life and you're not really, you have no aim, and you're shooting and you're missing, and you're constantly missing, but probably because we don't have a real aim to where we want to go. And I talk to business owners all the time, and I'm so surprised that nearly 100% of them don't really know what they want to do with their business long term.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the first things we address.
Yeah, great. So you've talked about long-term planning. So, there's a lot of different, I guess, mixed messages now for business owners around what the right way to plan is. There's like a one-page business plan that's annual. There's, 5-year strategic plans. There's 90-day plans. What do you recommend that for business owners? Where should they start?
Well, you're right. That is the hardest part to decide. What should the plan be? Really, I like to look at a plan very simply, that, there's specific things that I find about a plan. Number one, most people don't follow a plan. Even though they have a plan, they don't often just narrowly follow the plan. So, I would say that if you're starting with a business plan, to have a 5-year plan is probably your best bet, because you're thinking further enough ahead that you can kind of start to position and picture what you'd want your business to be longer term. Now, obviously, the shorter that becomes, the more detail gets filled in there. So we don't have to limit ourselves to just a 5 or a 3 or a 1-year plan. I think all of it is great, and everybody has what works for them the best. But for me, I like to look long term, mid term, short term, and really evaluate that. So I don't know that specifically we should not have at least one of those.
Yeah, great. I mean, that's like getting in a plane, right? And the pilot not knowing where they're going. Like, you have to have some idea of the direction, and then the actions that need to happen, the goals and actions that need to happen as a result of that. So, Darrick, tell me a client story of someone that you've worked with, and how that planning has really helped them.
Well, that's a great segue into kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit. Was, almost nearly every client we work with, they don't have a plan. But one specifically was, we worked with a client that had a manufacturing business where they did a lot of wood manufacturing, and he was manufacturing cupboards. And he was just not happy. I could tell he wasn't happy with his business. And, it just became really obvious that he was heading in the wrong direction. And specifically, he was not making money. He was not satisfied. He was working extraordinarily long hours and without any reward, because he wasn't even paying himself. And in this particular case, we sat down and did a business plan together, and he was about to partner with somebody. So he'd gotten to the point where he was tired of everything in his business and just wanted to get a partner. And I think it was like a cry for help. And we just caught it at the right time, because he went through the business plan, and inevitably one thing came out of the business plan was that they would not work well together, which was very evident when they started talking about who was going to do what, and how they were going to execute the plan, and who was going to be in charge of what. But specifically for this guy, he realized that he didn't want to do, he wanted to do wood manufacturing, but he didn't want to do the type of manufacturing he was doing. And he realized during the planning process that he was not happy with it. And specifically, this guy, I've got a testimonial from, because he's doubled his business every year since that day. And he's still a client. He's been a client for 3 years since I've started coaching, basically. And the really, I think what inspired me about him is that he found something that he loves. So he's building like roller coasters in Vancouver, Canada. We have a roller coaster. So now he's building the boxes for the roller coasters, and he's really targeted specific, museums and really like niche artwork. And his revenue is doubling every year. So he's on track this year to double once more. And he's hired a team. He had nobody working with him before. Now he's got a whole team of people. He's got his sales automation, and he just loves what he does. Like, absolutely inspired by it. So that was just one from a plan, specifically getting into the details, realizing that he doesn't like what he's doing. And I said, like, why are you doing it then? He said, well, what else can I do? I said, well, why don't we start thinking about that? And now he's built TED Talk. He's built stuff for TED Talk. He's built stuff for, a lot of big trade shows now, just a lot of cool. He built a pair of sunglasses out of wood, so just a giant pair of sunglasses out of wood, like bigger than, so just really found his passion during the planning process. And, he attributes, a lot of the success to that planning period. So, I mean, that was a great.
And that would have been a completely different story for him, right? Like if he had kept going on that trajectory without you stepping in to help him there, I wonder where he'd be today. It'd be a very different story. Yeah. So congratulations to you and to him on that success.
Well, I feel like, a big part of that, he would have, obviously this is what I see with everybody. It's not just, this is his story, but I could tell you 100 other stories similar to that where, just by producing that plan. And again, studies have been proven that business planning it works. But what's interesting, when people get asked whether they followed their plan or not, less than 2% do. But just to go through that process of thinking about, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are some of the threats to my business? What are the threats to me personally if I'm not happy? And, you go through those different sort of check boxes and you get to the end and you go, wow, I'm actually heading in the right direction or I'm not. And you don't follow it.
You're able to pivot. You're able to pivot
absolutely.
Sooner. Yeah. Even though that's pivot's a bit of a buzzword right now, but it is that being really clear on where you want to go and being able to adjust the business and or yourself or your team to be heading in a better direction that's going to help you achieve that longer term plan.
Absolutely.
So for business owners who are out there, you said 2% of businesses have a plan. Really? That's crazy.
No,
stats.
More than that probably have a plan, but less. What I was saying is based on the market, probably that's right. Less than 5% actually have a business plan, but even out of those 5% that have a plan, less than 2% follow.
Wow.
But they still get quite a bit of success, even just having the plan in place. So, I guess I don't know the exact statistics, but I've seen lots of different versions of what, people are doing for planning.
And it's so true, like even if you do a plan, often it just sits in the third drawer and you kind of get on with, life happens and you just don't come back and check in with it. Give me some tips on how let's say you've got a plan, that's step one. What's the next step to help you stay on track and check in with that plan?
Well, I guess really to stay on track, that's the interesting part about a plan. And that's kind of where I was going with that is, Harvard did a study on over 1,000 different entrepreneurs, and they'd actually gone through and did a business plan. And then there was another group that didn't do a business plan. And what was interesting about the story, and I can't even remember the book that I read this in, but what really interested me was that I knew that they were going in this direction with the story. They were going to say, okay, the people that did the business plan were successful, much more successful. And it was like 60% more profitable was the words that they used in the book. And what the twist was to the story was that when they asked the people that actually did the plan, did you follow it? Less than 2% of them followed it.
Right.
So
Right.
even though that they didn't follow the plan, just by completing the process of thinking big, like even though you didn't pull it out and look at it every day, they've thought about it. It's like it got put into their brain. It's like a stamp. They thought about what they could have, whether it's like 5 million or 2 million or whatever it was. And it just kind of stamped in there so that they would go after it. And eventually they would look at it and go, wow, we did a lot of curves. There was nothing in, like, we didn't hit it the way we thought we were going to do it, but we hit it nonetheless because we believed we could.
Yeah. You did the exercise and set the intention. And so apart from hiring a business coach, Darrick, what's the next step for a business owner in terms of, let's say they've got the plan, then what's next?
Well, I guess the biggest thing that I would suggest at any point is to work hard on growing yourself personally. One of the things that I would say, always start with the end in mind, like we always know, like don't leave that by chance. But also the value that, I'm a big believer that the value we bring to the world is proportionate to the problems that we solve. And so if we want to earn more and help more people, we have to learn more, because in order to learn, once we learn more, we can solve bigger problems. So I'm a big believer that, we're problem solvers as entrepreneurs. That's what we do. And if we want to earn more and make bigger impact in the world, then we have to solve bigger problems. So I would say, work hard on yourself, become interesting, become a leader, become a good communicator, become good at sales. Don't just settle for being, comfortable. That's a big thing. Get uncomfortable every day. That's a big one. Like, I'm a big believer in I don't intentionally go out of my way to make myself uncomfortable in a bad way, but it's exciting to be like, what could I learn today? Who could I become today? Because it's just a matter of, I look at somebody and I go, well, I could do what they're doing. I just need to know, like, what do I need to do? Be, do, have. What do I need to do? And who would I need to become to have his life? So you look at other business owners and you might get inspired by somebody and you just kind of figure it out and say, like, what would I need to do and who would I need to become in order to actually have what he has? That's what he did. That's exactly what that business owner did, unconsciously or consciously.
Yeah. So let's say that there's, in terms of learning for a business owner, how do you recommend that they, where do they go for learning? And obviously we have a lot of different education tools at ActionCOACH, but let's say there's a specific area of their business that they need to grow and learn in, is it a book? So let's say sales as an example. Is it a sales book? Like, what would you recommend to a business owner?
Wow, there's so many different ways to learn nowadays. We're so blessed. We get so many mentors mentoring us from the internet, and that's just such a cool thing because, back when I was like 10 or 11, I used to follow Zig Ziglar and listen. I bought one of his back then it was tapes. So we'd listen to tapes. And it was so inspiring to hear things from somebody that's so successful. So, I could turn to the internet, you can read books, you can do audio, you can do like Blinkist, like there's these softwares that shorten the book so you can just get the good out of it and go to the next one. One of the things I did when I decided that I wanted to really improve myself is I did a short version of a Blink every day it's been going on about 4 years. So it's 18 to 25 minutes a day of learning out of one book every single day. And people always say, how do you know so much? It's specifically, I was cheating a little bit because I was going through the books pretty quick. And I do like to read, like I like to read a whole book, and I generally will listen to a whole book on longer drives and stuff. But to really get the good stuff really quick, if you need to learn fast, you can get some of these, abbreviated, short versions of good books to learn fast.
Yeah, you're right. There is like a plethora of information now available on the internet for people to learn anything about anything. Sometimes that can be overwhelming though, right? So it's like, well, where's I think, is it asking somebody, or is it looking at, like you recommended, to those people who have paved the way, that are, influencers, or, experts in a particular area, and then ask them, or kind of research what they do?
Great sort of observation there. So what I would say is Brad Sugars and Action Coach taught me the formula for success is dreams, goals, learn, plan, act. So when I'm working with a client, one of the things I really get focused on is their dreams. And the reason why dreams and vision is important is because that leads everything else. So the fact is, you got your dreams. Now you're going to set goals for the timeline realistically and say specific, measurable goals. But the next one is learn. And I feel like a lot of people skip learn when they're planning. Right? What do I need to learn? Who do I need to become as a person? And I get very clear with all business owners, what is your learning plan? Not everybody else's learning plan. What do you specifically need to learn in order to achieve your dreams, your vision, and your goals? Because that is something I find all the time where, hey, read this book. Hey, check out this podcast. Hey, check this out. People say that to me now, and I don't mean to be offensive to people at this point, but I just say, no, thank you. I've got like 16 years of learning to do still, and I don't need any more suggestions. And probably the fact is their suggestion is going to be on my learning plan, right? That's my plan. It's my learning plan. So all my business owners, they need a learning plan that's theirs for their specific goals and dreams.
Oh, I love that. That is great. And gold. I mean, yes, so many people recommend different books from time to time, and you go out and you buy that book, and then this big pile just sits on your shelf, books that you have to read, but
piles of books and lots of suggestions, and they mean well. Everybody means well. And honestly, that book is perfect for them, but it's not perfect for you, because it may not be a part of your vision and your goal and your dream, right? And that's why we got to be careful. Again, going back to if you decide what you want out of life, it's going to be specific learning to what you need to learn, because somebody else's learning plan is not going to get you where you want to go. It's going to get you where they want to go.
That is a massive takeaway from this interview, Darrick. That is gold. Thank you. Love that. So it's not just planning your business, it's not just planning your life, but it's planning your learning. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Brilliant. Love it. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Darrick, let's jump into 3 quick fire questions. Are you ready to go?
Sure, let's go.
Okay. Well, what was your favorite business book?
7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yeah, specifically. It's one of those books that I read about once a quarter, believe it or not. And I don't read it. I'm not a big physical reader, but I listen to it once a quarter. I take away so much from it. And it's like when I'm ready to hear something, it's ready to talk to me again in a different language. Just so many good nuggets in that book, and just so many massive blinding flashes of the obvious is what I'd call it.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how you can read a book 2, 3, 4 times and you missed it the first time somehow? You just get different things, the more you read it.
I'm not sure you miss it, Michelle. I think it's specifically when you're ready to hear something, it's ready to talk to you. And that, that's what I really believe in, because I listen to Brad Sugars videos all the time. And there's times where I listen to it and I get some good stuff out of it. And then there's times where it's like he was screaming, did he write this for me? Was he specifically speaking to me? I remember listening to, what's it called? The E-Myth. And I swore they wrote that book for me back when I was an entrepreneur and running in every direction and a technician and manager and doing all these different things. I thought they wrote that book for me. And I tell business owners that all the time, there's probably books that you're going to feel that they've written for you.
Just for you. Yeah. I mean, I'm reading Think and Grow Rich again. I think it's like the 4th time I've read it. And the gold in it for me, yes, I saw you pick that up earlier, is the persistence, the chapter on persistence. And that's exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, number 2. So, and you're allowed 2 answers here. Who's been the best mentor or coach for you?
Back in the day, like I'd mentioned earlier, Zig Ziglar was really inspiring to me. There was just something about him. He was saying one time that, you can do, and, it doesn't matter where you come from. And he'd always have these like little one-liners. And he said, like, you can become whoever you want to be. Basically it was similar to Be Do Have, but more specific, like he was speaking to me. And, it's like he said, Darrick, you can achieve anything you want to achieve. You just have to work hard. And, I would say he was very inspiring and just had the best way to deliver on a lot of things. And then so many, again, 1 or 2 is just not enough. Obviously, a little later on, I ran into Jim Rohn, which you hear from everybody talks about Jim Rohn, and he's just unbelievably. I really think the best mentors can simplify things. I don't think they're the people that talk over everybody else. They really can break things down, because I believe that in order to be a great mentor or teacher, you got to be able to explain it in a way that everyone can understand it. So I would say that those 2 have made a massive impact on my life.
Amazing. And number 3, what's the best piece of a business advice that you've ever received?
Going back to Jim Rohn, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Specifically, that just resonates with me in so many different ways. I just feel like people underestimate the value of what they can become, and the person that they can become. It doesn't matter who you are. I mean, I've looked back at my life and just, questioned a lot about myself and said, why didn't I do this stuff earlier? And it's never too late. Don't get me wrong, but it's never too early to really start working on yourself. And if I could go back to my old version of myself, that's the only thing I would tell myself is to, that was my challenge in school, though, is I felt like I was always learning what others wanted me to learn. And I never, ever found my path in school because it was so, this science and that math. And although I just did it to get by, but if they would have said, hey, what's your learn plan, Darrick? Where do you want to go in life? And let's specifically make this for you. And that's what I do with all the business owners. I no longer make them learn what I want to learn until I know exactly what their dreams and goals are. And they say, well, can I just like what for? Because specifically, if you have a goal in your life, and dreams can grow, of course, and you may need to change your learning plan down the road. But specifically, if you have that learning plan, I just feel like you love learning. I love learning. I never did. I never loved learning. I used to tell people I hated school. I never wanted anything to do with school. And then I realized that when it's my plan and my learning and the things that I want to learn, it's just like all the business owners I work with now, it's so much nicer and easier to work with them because they just love it. They love learning. They're gaining a lot of traction from it because it's what they want. It's not my dream, it's their dream.
This whole interview has just been so inspiring.
So one of the things I'd like to share is one of the biggest learnings that I've just come up with recently. I was listening to a podcast with David Goggins and Andrew Huberman, and they were talking about the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And why this was so fascinating, is because, going back to the days when I was listening to the old gurus like Tony Robbins and Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, one of the things that they used to say is that if you're not growing, you're dying. And it made sense to me because I always felt like if you're not doing things to better yourself, you're not going to feel alive and, growing to that next level. But I could never really scientifically talk about that. So what was interesting is I came across this podcast that I just mentioned. And one of the specific things that they were talking about is the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And it's a part of your brain that literally is tied to the will to live. And so how this works is, I'll get to the topic here, but how this works is when you do things that you don't like to do, which is most business owners, they do things a lot that they don't like to do, but they're the ones that do it anyway, right? They do it anyway, their resilience, and they just push through it. So in one of the examples in this podcast is he specifically used cold baths. And so they'd put people in a cold bath, and every time that they would go into the cold bath and they didn't want to do it, they could actually watch this part of the brain grow. And remember that part of the brain is attributed to the will to live. So specifically, where it gets kind of funny is the minute they started enjoying the ice bath, they seen the benefits from it, and it basically was less resistance to want to join it. It would stop growing. So in order to grow it again, they would have to do something that was uncomfortable, something that they didn't like to do. So if you like running, guess what? It doesn't grow no more. The minute you run a little bit further and you don't like that part of it, the last 2 or 3 minutes, it would grow again. And they could specifically tie this to the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. But going back one step here is specifically when they did a test on people who are, successful and later on in life, they're resilient, like Goggins and, these kind of guys, their part of the brain is just huge. So it was directly tied to a lot of people who were seen to overcome adversity. They had a really tough life growing up, and they could test that part of the brain. I'm not a neuroscientist or anything, so I don't know enough about this to really understand what I'm even saying. But just a powerful moment is literally they can prove that somewhat this is tied to the will to live. And you wonder why the people that do things that they don't like to do day in and day out, they just have the resilience. And people go, how do you get the willpower? Well, I don't have willpower. I just do things that I hate doing lots. And it just becomes easier and easier over time. And it's, there's a part of it. So that's where it attributes to that.
Darrick Boyes, thank you so much for all the tips and wisdom you've shared with me today and the team.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to be on here.
Michelle Adams, your host here. Hats off to you for committing to your learning by listening to this podcast. And if you'd like some help implementing some of these strategies, then click the link in the description to find your local action coach. They can help you put these strategies into action and take your business and your life to the next level. In the meantime, like and subscribe so that you're the first to get our next episode. We'll see you soon.